What a day for a daydream. Okay, I have that music bug in my ear because Stuart, in addition to his other talents, is also a beautiful guitar player, and he was strumming that song as I was setting up all of this stuff to make a beautiful flower arrangement. And I want to talk a little bit about my inspiration and then the practicalities of putting it all together. So you may be like me and you keep all sorts of magazine tear sheets of things that you find beautiful as future inspiration, and I do too. I have a file folder that is just of cut flower arrangements, things that I might want to try to simulate in the future in tone and in maybe shape, if not exactly in flowers. So this comes out of an old Martha Stewart magazine, and I just love the deep hues of it. Now, in my garden, I'm not quite ready for chrysanthemums yet. It's still a little bit early, a little too warm. But in my house, I am, because I think they set the perfect seasonal tone for this time of year, and I love this color palette. So I'm just going to go with that inspiration. So typically what I do is I think about that when I go to my flower source, whether it's my florist, whether it's like this time I went to Trader Joe's, wherever I go, I think about the vibration and the feel and the ambiance I'm trying to create. So I did that this week. I went to Trader Joe's and I got some mixed greens. And if anyone knows the name of this mixed green here, it's got kind of a spiky quality. I absolutely love the texture of it. Please let me know. It has some great coloration on the stems and almost some little tiny seed head or flower heads. Then I got some chrysanthemums, which I find a little bit stiff to work with, but I'm going to show you a tip that I got from that magazine article that I cut out and how to make them look a little bit more relaxed. Then I got one of my very favorite things. I don't think I can ever go to Trader Joe's without getting a huge bouquet of seeded eucalyptus. I absolutely love it in its fresh and in its dried state. And then I've got some other things that I picked from the garden. Now, what I typically do is I try to get an abundance of different textures, and my eyes are just always too big for my stomach, or my cuttings are just too big for the small bouquet I think I always have in mind, because no matter what, I end up typically with something rather massive that is still appropriate for my dining room table or for my book table, and I just can't resist the play of colors and textures and form and just the romance of it all. So this is how this one came together. So those were the things that I got at Trader Joe's, and I of course looked for flowers that were fresh and that, as I said, spoke to my theme. Then I went out into the garden and I wanted to get some things, whether they were foliage or berries or evergreens or seed heads, anything that spoke to the ambiance I was trying to create. So I even got some unusual things. My beloved Chinese snowball viburnum is just a plant that keeps on giving. And I've said it once, I've said it a million times, I will never have anything in my garden that I can't also cut from and use as a resource for some cut flower bouquets. And I love the way there is a color variant on the spent flower heads that perfectly, I think, really resonates with these other colors that I'm using. So that was number one, so I cut some of that. Then I'm coupling that seeded eucalyptus, and look how it's a tone-on-tone thing and a slight variation in texture, coupled with the spikiness and the delicacy of this green, of these greens that I got from Trader Joe's. And then I want, because I've got all of this delicacy here and these small leaves and small fronds, I wanted something that was a little bit bolder. And you could use any kind of foliage for this. This happened to be a button bush that was a sucker that came up, and I cut a large branch of that. And look immediately how it gives a backdrop for these other delicate textures to play. And then I got, because I can't resist this time of year, I also took some not yet in full bloom but some flower heads of Sedum Autumn Joy that gives a little bit more of a pop of lightness and kind of a limey green to this arrangement. Then of course, I have my beautiful mums that will give the punch of color that I want for that. And then I think I had a couple more components. Yes, I may or may not include a little bit of English ivy there because of its dark green color, and I love the veining and how it echoes the other light shades. And then, because I love the whimsy of it, and I love the color of the vining tendrils of this Carolina jasmine, I also cut some of that, and look how the color of that stem is an echo to the color of that darker chrysanthemum. So that's kind of how this all came together in terms of the design of my palette. And all of these, you guys, are rather long-lived. Here will be a place where we're going to cut to an arrangement that I did for my dining room table last week. It lasted longer than a week, and actually these seed heads, or these flower heads rather, from the Sedum Autumn Joy, I just took that out of that old arrangement and I'm using them again. So let me kind of clear the decks here and then show you what I'm going to use as my container. But let me show you the brilliance of this container. So I think all of this really speaks the same language of any kind of basket. And I really like this handled basket. You can get these on Amazon. I'll put a link below, for practically nothing. And I have them in different sizes. I like using them sometimes as little purses. I like using them when I go to the market. But they also can be a great vessel for a cut flower arrangement if you put something in them that will help them maintain their form. And in this case, I put a Folgers coffee can, one of my favorite things to use as a cut flower container that I then hide in another vessel or container or basket that's not waterproof. Now, what I'm using is a flower frog, and a lot of you have asked me in my other arrangements, do I use a flower frog? And I typically do, though it might be a makeshift frog, and in some little tips I'm going to show you later, I'll show you some other things that do double duty. They have an original purpose, and then I use them to make flower arrangements. But basically anything that has a wire frame and has some openings that can support large branches is perfect for this kind of thing. In this case, it is just a ball of chicken wire. I have used this same ball of chicken wire for probably hundreds of flower arrangements. I just got a little bit of it at the hardware store. You can find small amounts of it at Michael's or at hobby stores. And then all I did was form it into a ball. I put water in this container, and then let me leave you for just a moment. Okay, I found some scissors that would open up my cut flower food. Now, I don't always use cut flower food, you guys, but in this case, it came with the flowers that I got at Trader Joe's. So since I've already secured this to the basket, I'm just going to pour it through that cage. And then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just use a stem or something to kind of mix it up. This is cool fresh water. Now, these flowers have been conditioned overnight. I both cut the ones from my garden and I brought them back from Trader Joe's yesterday. I recut the stems before I put them in here, and they have been hydrating and conditioning overnight. I also, as they were conditioning, put some cut flower food inside this water bucket. Again, I don't do that all the time, but I think it does help a little bit on the margins. So I'm going to refer to my diagram. And what I like about this is it just has a very whimsical, free-form quality to it, with components that just kind of flow out of the container in all sorts of blousiness and ebullience, and I love that. So you may think that I might want to put in the flowers last, but in this case, I really think I'm going to put the flowers in first because I want them to kind of be the stars of the show and also frame and provide some structure to the rest of the more delicate things that go in. So I'm going to start first of all, I think, with this branch of buttonbush. Partly because it's one of the larger layers and also because it's kind of the canvas upon which these other textures are going to play. All of these principles of this flower design are also principles that I take straight from the garden. If they're true in the garden, then they're true in the vase. If this composition looks good in the vase, it looks good in the garden. So it's a very, it is very informative and teaches us lessons in a number of different ways. Okay, so I'm going to press this down a little bit and put in my first component. Okay. Now, what I want to make sure of is that the water level is adequate and the length of the stems is adequate so they actually make contact with the water. I want to keep that in mind as this arrangement matures and ages because I may have to replenish that water level almost every day, and I can do that with just fresh water, so that's very important. So now I am going to start on my infrastructure of mums. Now these mums, I think these humble mums are often overlooked, I think, as unless you get them in kind of sometimes a cheesy arrangement, they are, I think, sometimes abused and misused for the potential that they can have in your vase. So I am going to cut some of these at various lengths, and I'll show you why momentarily. So you always strip all of the foliage that's going to be underwater, and then I try to cut things at an angle to create lots of surface area for water absorptions. So I'm going to put this one in about right there. And you see how marvelously this chicken wire holds up these mums. Now what I'm going to do is cut one just maybe a bit shorter than that. So you see what I mean by these stems just being very stiff? They don't bend, they look a little constipated. They just don't do what I want them to do. I like things that have a little bit more flexibility and movement. So now I'm going to put this one in at the base of the other one, and you can see that it is just slightly shorter than that original bunch. Again, these are in here. One mistake I often make is that I don't really provide a good enough infrastructure for the arrangements that I do, and then I'm always having to kind of mess with them a little bit more once I get them in place. So I'm going to shove that down in there. And I have found that really it's kind of an organic process, that I work on it, then I work on it again. And when do I know I'm finished? When I run out of time or I run out of flowers. Okay, so now I am going to put this one a little bit in the foreground. So you can see, let me see if what I'm telling you is true. Yes, you can see that I just have kind of a comma or an apostrophe of these as they take form in the arrangement. And that provides movement with this arc that I can't get out of these stiff stems. So now I'm going to put one last bunch in here, I think. I'm going to turn this around to do it, you guys. And this is a way you can get really great drama from a very inexpensive flower. And often by putting in another one, I dislodge the original one. So I think, can you see there how there's a nice comma? There is some movement to that arrangement that I wouldn't have otherwise. And now I'm going to do, I think, just a couple of singular stems that will be delicate right in the front. And they have to be long enough, again, to make contact with the water. And I'm creating some gaps with these, you guys, but that's okay because I'm going to fill that in with some foliage. So now that I've got that in place, I think I am going to come back and do something really fun and kind of whimsical. Look at those wonderful tendrils. Sometimes a feature that can be either good or bad in the garden can be wonderful in the vase. And Carolina jasmine in some locations can be kind of invasive, but I find it indispensable in the garden because of its arching quality and the way it kind of weaves itself around the base of any kind of flower arrangement. So I'm going to tuck this in on this side, and then I'm going to torture it a little bit and weave it around the front. And then because it's got a very vining quality to it, I can take the other end of the vine and weave it through this chicken wire that will secure it in place. Now I know full well that once I get this inside, I'm going to want to play with that a little bit more. But right now, just like this picture where there's all of these pendulous things that come out from the main flower arrangement, that is what the purpose that this Carolina jasmine is going to serve. It's just going to kind of spill out from the edges. Now I think I'm going to go with something that's a little bulkier and will be a beautiful counterpoint to these mums. Now I'm cutting this woody stem vertically from the bottom. I could smash it with a hammer, but that's a little bit too violent and I don't have a hammer at hand, so I'm just going to cut it vertically. And what that does is it too will enable water uptake. So, ooh, I like the way that's coming together. I'll show it to you in just a moment. Oh, I'm having a disaster here. That's okay. Okay, take off some of this foliage. A lot of these big bouquets I get at Trader Joe's are really top heavy. It's always important to give yourself a wide girth. I feel a little bit like Julia Childs. Remember when she said she dropped something on the floor and she said, well, if nobody, it's a 3-second rule or something like that. If nobody's there to see it, then you just pick it back up and continue to cook with it. So that is what I'm going to do with the things that I just dropped. Ooh, okay, let me show you. Look, what did that do? Isn't that wonderful? Stuart, tell me that's wonderful. And I'm gonna do one more. Sometimes it's just something really odd that turns out to be your favorite component of a flower arrangement and really pulls it all together. And I can tell in this case it's going to be the spent flower heads of that Chinese snowball viburnum. Probably the most asked about plant in my garden. Is that not true, Stuart? Okay, put one more in here. Okay, isn't that coming together beautifully? I think it is. And Stuart has to say yes, just because. Now I think I need a little bit more verticality to this. So I'm going to get some of these mixed greens. Again, somebody asked me yesterday in the Facebook group, I think it was, if I knew what the name of this stuff was, and I don't. It looks like something that would probably be native to California or some drier climate. It has kind of an Australian vibe to it, I think. Even though I recut these stems last night, notice that I'm recutting all of them again. Sometimes I put them in place, I may take them out again. It's all trial and error. And honestly, I guess there's no real right way or wrong way to do it. It's just what is pleasing to you. So I'm kind of just guesstimating this at this point, you guys. And I'll turn it around so I can see what you're seeing. Ooh, I'm liking that. Look at that wonderful color echo of the inside stem of this greenery and that kind of burnished bronze look of the Carolina jasmine. And even though this container isn't really large, can you see how I can make a rather massive arrangement out of a relatively small container? Now I think I want to start injecting a little bit more texture. So, time for me to open up this seeded eucalyptus. I made a huge arrangement with this seeded eucalyptus as the star for my husband's nephew's wedding. Years ago, it was an October wedding, and these colors were really just perfect. Okay. And by the way, this seeded eucalyptus dries beautifully. So a lot of times I will take it out of the arrangement as it's begun to dry and just have nothing in the basket or in a basket other than just eucalyptus. So now it's really starting to kind of cascade over the sides and kind of rework some of these little blooms. And again, this gives movement to the entire arrangement. I have alluded a lot in the past to a floral designer named Constance Spry, who was I think she died in the 1940s, but she was very, very influential in terms of using natural things and garden cuttings and more of a garden-y feel to arrangements than others that were a little bit more stiff. And I still like these that have a more garden-y feel to them versus those that are just, oh, they just kind of look like a ball, kind of very FTD. And I just really like these that are more gardeny in nature. I also think that they tend to kind of maybe last a little bit longer because of their freshness. Because a lot of it, as I said, comes from your garden. So I'm just on this back side, I'm just repeating some of these same things and these same colors. You may be wondering if I'm going to use these dark burgundy mums, and actually I kind of haven't decided yet if I am or I'm not. Now the thing about delicate foliage is you can sometimes get a little too much of it, but I like the way that is looking. Now, again, you guys, there is no right way or wrong way to do this. And I have done these flower and arranging workshops for a lot of different things. And I did one for a group of women at a nursing home once. And I just had lots of cuttings. I brought lots of things from my garden. And they then created their own arrangements. And at the nursing home, they were able to go out around the facility and cut some things and bring them in. And I got some of the nicest thank you notes after that from these women, because it just opened up a whole new portal for creativity for them, I think. And I think letting our creative juices flow is one of the most amazing things we can do. Stuart, how's that looking? So these kind of arrangements are very, very three-dimensional. Seldom ever do I have an arrangement that's just flat on one side so that you would just get 180 degrees of it. Most of the time, my arrangements are completely 360. You can see them all the way around. I think that's another reason that mine tend to be rather large. But I mean, really, you guys, which one of these textures would you leave out? And how could you? How could you leave it out? Because it's just too fun. In some areas, I'm very much a minimalist. I know you may not believe that. But in other things, I am not. More is better. Now it may look at this point like it's starting to get a little bit too large, but remember the context of this. There's lots of stuff around me, there's lots of busyness, and once I get it to where it's going to be, the table is rather large and there'll be a lot of room for it. How much did this cost me to put together? And how much would it have cost if I went to a florist? And this is taking me some time. I don't deny it. I don't do this every day. I don't even do it every week. But I do it enough that it makes me want to do it again. And this whole arrangement, in addition to my expenditure of time going to the store and such, I think I got 2 clumps of mums. I always save these little bits for tiny bouquets. I got 2 bunches of mums, and they were $3.99 a piece. And I got a bunch of greens, and it was $2.99. I got 2 bunches of greens, some eucalyptus. Maybe the eucalyptus was $3.99. At any rate, you can see that almost for under $10, I got all of this. And if you had purchased this from a florist, I can promise you it would have been considerably more. And you wouldn't have had the fun and the satisfaction of doing it yourself. Flowers and these kind of arrangements just make me happy. Ooh, look at that. Sometimes I'll add one dimension and it just really pleases me. The other thing, notice how these are kind of arching a little bit. It almost looks like they're somewhat windblown. I'm going to turn this around in front for a moment because I need to add a little hole there that needs fixing. Now, some people might say that this is kind of a messy arrangement, and I will concede that point in the same way that I will concede that a lot of English decorating looks kind of messy, and there's just too much of it. But I will also say that that's what gives it its homey, casual appeal and what makes me like it. So you guys, I think you get the idea. I'm going to work on this just a little bit more, and then I'll finish it up and I'll show you what it looks like when it's all together.